What's up, everyone? Welcome to episode 19 of the Existential Stoic Podcast. I'm Randy with my bud Danny.
Hey, Randy.
Hey, Danny. Today we are talking about problems. Not only problems, but the inevitability and the gift of problems.
I get the inevitability, but the gift?
The gift, yes.
The gift of problems.
Yeah, it turns out with every burden, there is also a blessing. But
I've heard that before.
Coincidentally, with every blessing, there's also a burden.
There is, yes. That's also how that works.
Yeah, so today we're going to take a look at problems and take a look at how they're inevitable, why they're inevitable, and also the benefits we can get from them. But before we do, guys, make sure to subscribe and also share the episode. That helps us out so much. Share it with your friends, your family, your loved ones, your hated ones, people who you think need this.
Yeah, right? It helps, and hopefully, the more we share, the better.
Yeah,
Always good.
So, problems. Problems are interesting. I was actually, having some problems at work this week.
Were you? What were your problems at work?
Well, just, I think, different values between myself and some of the other people that I work with. Yeah. And
that's always hard, right? When we have different perspectives, we have, we don't always see eye to eye, and we also don't always understand each other because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but you see, the thing is with life, if you're not complacent, you're pretty much always going to have problems.
It is interesting, isn't it, that anytime we are active, we're trying to do something for ourselves, we're trying to move forward, we are always going to encounter problems, roadblocks of various kinds, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just life.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like the hero's journey. Like, as soon as we decide we want something, literally by deciding that we want something other than what is, that defines a problem. Because there's some type of obstacle between where you are and what you want. And so, by definition, once you want something, there's a problem.
There's a problem that you have to figure out how to get it, right? And it's funny, too, because that is life. I mean, that really defines life. It's like, anytime we want new things, we want to improve a situation, we recognize that things could be better, and then all of a sudden, now we have all these problems. Because as long as we don't recognize it, there's no issue, right? There's no problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's interesting because it also shows, I think, by your ability to recognize these problems, it really shows human beings' creativity, our ability to adapt, our ability to make the world what we want, if we want to. And that's part of the issue, right? Is we have to change things to make them fit what we want. That is the problem.
Yeah. And part of it as well is the expectation that there shouldn't or won't be problems.
Yeah, that is a funny thing, isn't it? Expecting that there shouldn't be. Why do we even expect?
Yeah.
Why do we have that expectation?
Ugh, another problem.
I know, right?
This. Do they ever end? If it's not one thing, it's 12 others. Yeah, it's kind of this false belief, this faulty mental model we have that there shouldn't be problems.
It's interesting, right? We have these very odd sort of like almost like paradoxes in how we think about the world. We expect things not to change, but we know they change. Right? We expect no problems, but there are going to be problems. Like, we know there will be, but we also expect there not to be. It's very odd.
There pretty much have to be problems. Like, I think that's part of the title today, the inevitability. There have to be problems. Unless you're, like, completely just complacent with your life or dead, you're pretty much guaranteed to have problems.
The only way I could imagine there not being problems is if you weren't doing anything, but even then, you presumably are just ignoring your problems, right? You're not really, it's not like you don't have any, you're just ignoring them and not addressing them.
Or maybe you're just in the state of 100% acceptance.
Maybe, yeah.
Like, maybe you're one of those people who's just like, I'm just going to go with life, whatever it is.
Whatever it is, yeah.
And I think that's actually part of it, because the only way to really get rid of problems is to get rid of the idea of problems.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah, so like these problems are this thing that something is wrong with my life and I need to fix it. Whereas instead of looking at it like that, being like, this is the journey that my life is taking right now. This is the difficulty, but this is the journey. Because this idea of a problem being wrong, like if somebody says that person's a problem, or I have this problem in my life, at least in my mind, the connection is that that's bad. That should be changed.
Oh, yeah. That we should fight against it, change it, get rid of it, right? Do something like that to exclude it from existence from our world.
Whereas instead of being bad, just realizing that that's the area of tension.
I like that way of thinking about it. That it needs to be tweaked It needs to be sort of maybe we could
that's where
harmonize it. Yeah,
that's where the struggle is in life. Like I just mentioned to you that I started going back to the gym and I'm the sorest I've been in a long time. But like, I don't say that going to the gym is a problem. Like that's just the area where there's tension in my life, because it's through that tension that the muscles can actually grow.
Well,
I can get better.
And I think that's a good example, right? I think, it's funny, but working out, that physical activity is a great metaphor or model for our lives in general, right? That, because when you exercise, you go through a routine, you make it a habit, it's difficult, and you want it to be difficult so that you excelled, so that you move forward, right? So there is this difficulty and there's this pain, but at the same time, it's not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing. And as you do it more and more, you get better and better. And I think that's true in life. And we often forget that, right? That, really it takes us doing these things and hitting these sort of roadblocks and struggles to develop and get better. And we can embrace them in a different way. I think you're right that looking at problems as something that are bad or negative will also cause us to avoid them, think about them or imagine them to be worse than they are. Because, there's a lot of philosophers that talk about problems as like a positive thing. Rethinking, Nietzsche talks about like rethinking or reinterpreting suffering as something positive, because it's through that suffering, through that struggle, that we actually develop. And without it, we wouldn't change. We wouldn't get better. We wouldn't learn new skills. We wouldn't figure out who we are. We wouldn't try new things, because every new thing is a new encounter, which means it will have struggle, right?
Mm-hmm. And I think the skillful thing to do is to actually choose the problems that'll get you where you want to go. Because you're guaranteed to have problems in life. That's a guarantee. But the type of problems you have really dictate where you go. Because when you get through the problem, you grow. You're a different person than you were before. So making sure that the problems you have and the problems you're taking on are ones that are worthwhile in your growth and development.
How do we figure out, though, which problems are right for us?
Yeah.
How do we figure out, should I avoid this problem? Should I ignore it? Should I embrace it? Should I go, how do we determine which problems are the right problems for us in life, do you think?
Yeah. So it really comes down to figuring out where you want to go in life. And we've done some episodes about that, trying to figure out your ideal life, and you can listen to those episodes. But really determining where you want to go. Because if you have kind of one general thing that you want in life and you can just focus on that thing, you can achieve that, you can have that. You're going to have to encounter problems, you're going to have to overcome difficulties and challenges. But if you focus on that one thing and you say, hey, I'm willing to deal with all the problems I have to do in this one thing. Like, let's say make $1 million or whatever it is. I'm willing to do whatever I need to in this. If other problems come along, I'm going to let them go because they're not important problems for me right now. But the problems that for doing this, I'm going to encounter all of them. I'm going to overcome all of them, whatever it takes. That way you can actually get somewhere. Because if you can do one thing at a time, like they say that FOCUS is an acronym for follow one course until successful.
Oh, I like that, yeah.
Yeah. And so you focus on one thing, and however long it takes, you accomplish that one thing. And then you go on to the next thing. And so by doing one thing at a time and not letting other things bother you as best as possible.
Yeah, yeah.
And also when those things do bother you, like for instance, this thing at work, that's not like this is I'm talking about focusing on one thing and then I'm letting these other things bother me. So obviously,
but it's still on your mind.
Yeah. Like, I'm not an expert at it. I'm just practicing like anybody else. But noticing the positive. So instead of like becoming totally stressed out at this problem, noticing the positive. And just at first it's a struggle to try and figure out the positive in these things. But after a while, after you're doing it often enough, it may come easier to where every obstacle you can see the blessing within.
I think it's also interesting because, it's also the type of problems we encounter. It's easy to get, I guess, we talking about focus, right? It's easy to get kind of overwhelmed because you have too many things you're looking at, too many things you're trying to deal with, so that you really have a lot of problems that you're never really addressing, you're never really facing, right? Because there's always something else to distract you. And I think that's absolutely true. If you allow yourself to have too much drama, too much obstacles in the way, you'll never have the concentration or really the energy to address a real problem and grow, right? That's part of it. I think the other side of it too is like, what kind of problems are you facing, right? Like, your problem at work, is with other individuals at work who are not sort of carrying their weight. And, it's a team thing, right? So it's really about, how the team functions. And the interesting thing is it's also individual doctors. So it's not really a team in that sense. So it's about, like what is it about it that's bothering me? And is it something that I can overcome and actually develop from? Or is it more of a frustration? Or, how do we define it? Does that make sense?
Like, the difficulty that I'm having is, how can I best change in this situation? Because I know I can't change them. So where I'm struggling right now is just the difficulty of, how can I change to make the best of this situation? And that I'm not quite sure. Because I'm looking at, like, do I just accept it? Do I talk with them about it? Do I just ignore it and just work as hard as I can? Like, what's the best solution? And that's some of the struggle there.
Well, yeah, it's difficult when you're dealing with people not pulling, not doing their work, not doing their fair share, maybe something like that. It's hard because you don't want to reduce yourself to their level, because then you're not doing your best. You're not doing what you should be doing. So maybe is it a point of just not, that it's not worth your time, that it's not worth worrying about? You just focus on you. Is it something that you address it? I mean, these are the difficulties with problems, right? Is that we have to figure out what's the right perspective on it? What's the right way to move forward? And this is why we need focus too. Because I think when we're distracted, it becomes increasingly hard, because you can't even identify what the problems are in your life, right? And this is where direction, I think, comes into play. You had mentioned, having sort of a clear plan, a clear path. And, it's interesting. You see this a lot in, like, I think in ethics and stuff, a lot of it is about self-control, character building, character development. And a lot of that, they talk about it, like, in terms of, like, unity, right? Like, having, like, a self means having, like, a unified self. You're building yourself around something. So what are you building your life around? I like to think of it that way. What is my life being built around? What's my passion? What's my interest? What's my goal? What's the direction I want to go that's giving me some sort of, like, solid idea of a life? Does that kind of make sense? Like, you're almost constructing it, right? Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a clear plan, you have, like, all these vague ideas. You get vague results, right? You'll get a bunch of sort of, like, maybe you'll get developed in one area, not in another. Maybe you'll get good at one thing, not another, and you'll never really move forward in the way you want.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, how I see this now is it's just kind of a step on the path. Like, this is a means to an end that I'm looking for, and it's not something long term. It's just, until that certain point, then I can move forward.
Well, I think those are our biggest, a lot of times, at least for me too, these are the biggest challenges in life, is when we're facing, like, almost like a transitionary period. Those problems are very difficult. We know we want to move on to something else. We want to know we want to do something else, and those are difficult because you have to figure out what you want, right?
Yeah,
I mean, it's like the existential crisis.
Yeah, it's like, I don't want to do what I'm doing now, but this is a necessary step to get to where I want to.
Yeah, and that's the difficulty with problems, right? Is identifying the right ones and figuring it out. Mm-hmm. And this is, I think, where most of us struggle, because we are, I find myself used to do this a lot. I'd have problems, and instead of facing them, I would ignore them. I would distract myself with other things.
Man, running from problems. I did that for a long time.
Yeah, you run from them. You create new problems to sort of distract yourself from those problems, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, all of us create problems of, like, perfectionism, anxiety, stuff like this, because we're really hiding from other issues, I think. What do you think this boils down to? I mean, when we talk about problems and we talk about, the potential gift of problems, I mean, personally, I think this is really, again, it's about taking, like, ownership of your life. It's about, it's about the responsibility to face the things that are inevitably you're going to face, right? I mean, life always has issues. It always has problems, because it's change.
I think it boils down to our relationship with desire. There's this saying that all of man's problems come from his inability to sit still and do nothing.
It's hard.
Yeah. So, like, because we desire something, a problem is created, but we get to choose how we actually relate with that desire. And a faulty relationship with that desire is, I'm going to be unhappy until I have the object of my desire. Whereas a better relationship could be like, this difficulty and desire and problem is the path to what I want in life.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've been reading Nietzsche again, so it's on my mind. But he mentions, when he talks about will to power, he says, what is greatness? It's the ability to will a goal and the means to get it. So essentially, he thinks whenever you will something, whenever you want something, any goal, desire, you're going to encounter resistance. We've already talked about this, right? There will be problems along the way. There will be, there's going to be things that you need to do to get it. Because if you want something you don't have it. So in order to get it, you have to do stuff, whether it's develop a new skill, an object, build a house, whatever it is. And so being able to have the strength to actually will that goal, but also will the ability to actually deal with the resistances in your path, right? To have the strength of either character, however you want to think of it, strength of will, to say, this is what I want, and I am willing to accept that this is going to be part of the bargain, right? Part of the deal is I have to do these things to get it.
Yeah. It's interesting because so many people will say the same thing, like Earl Nightingale in The Strangest Secret. He says that success is the progressive realization of a worthy ideal. Meaning that you have to, exactly like Nietzsche's saying, once you decide you want something and you will it, you have to progressively realize it. But the success isn't actually at the end. The success is in that progressive realization, in being knee-deep in the problems.
Well, yeah, I think that's where a lot of our issue is, right? Because we think, if I get this thing, then I'm happy. If I get this thing, I get my goal. And we always construe success with the end result.
Yeah, that's my biggest faulty mental model.
God, it's so hard though. It is hard, right? Because, and I understand, it's funny because I also know why it's hard. We all struggle with it because we're taught it from an early age, right? We're taught in school. Everything is about assignments. It's about grades. It's all about really the results. It's nothing to do with the process, right? And so we get this faulty model that, we need to pursue these goals and that will make us happy. That will give us what we want. That'll make our lives better.
But how's that working so far?
Right, yeah, it hasn't worked. And it hasn't worked because we're missing out on living. We're missing the whole point that, it's in that process that we actually feel better, that we actually do succeed, that we actually do overcome obstacles. And it's interesting, again with Nietzsche, he says he says happiness is the realization or the feeling of increasing power. So it's experiencing, and the way I interpret that is if I will something and I know, say I want to complete I'll just use writing for an example. Say I wanted to write a book and it's, I'm struggling with it and I say, okay, I'm just going to focus and do a chapter a day. And every time I complete that chapter, every time I do it, I feel good. I feel increased, right? I have this ability, I have this skill, I've accomplished it. You're moving forward, you're working towards what you want. Another way to look at that is you're being creative in the world. You're being active. You're an agent. Right? You're not just a sort of, you're not a victim. You're not sort of being pulled along by the stream. You're actually directing it. And I think that's really what's interesting because we so often get caught up in looking just at the end that we forget the whole point of living. I think we forget that, to be alive is to live. It's to be active, right?
Enjoy it. Yeah. I'm reading this book it's not by Naval Ravikant. It's the Almanac of Naval Ravikant. So somebody took all of his tweets and his speeches and put it together in a really good book. But he's talking about perspective and just seeing that, the universe has been here for a billion years before you came here, and it'll probably be here for another billion years after you're gone. So really your life and your legacy is just a teeny little firefly blip in the map of everything that's gone on. So what better purpose could you have in your life than actually enjoying it?
That is interesting, right? This idea that, when you really have perspective on the issue, our lives are so small, but we make them so big. And when we think that way, we end up making every little issue this huge deal, right? And, I think it really makes our thinking problematic because we're not looking forward at, what are we doing? How are we living? How are we being active? How are we actually enjoying ourselves? So how do we, because we talk about the inevitability of problems, right? And we're thinking here in terms of looking at problems differently. So how do we enjoy problems? How do we enjoy the process of moving forward with problems, with addressing problems, with facing them, and really building ourselves in that way?
I know we enjoy it. I think first thing is we need to accept the inevitability of problems. They say that be prepared, the Boy Scout motto.
And you were an Eagle Scout.
They say be prepared because the preparation is absolutely key. And the preparation allows you to be ready for the obstacles. It may not prepare you exactly for it. Like, you may not be able to know the exact problems you'll have to overcome or encounter, but just knowing that you will have problems gives you a little bit more over somebody who just goes into it blindly, not expecting any problems at all.
Yeah, so having the ability to plan, having some sort of plan, some sort of sense of
planning
what you
your
need.
work and working your plan, and then
I like that.
and then changing that as needed. Because, like, I always like this analogy of the airplane. You know, you take a flight from New York to L.A. Well, the plane is initially pointed towards L.A., but it gets off course and it has to readjust and again point towards LA and adjust and adjust and adjust and adjust. It's not like it just takes one path the whole entire time. It's constantly readjusting based on the wind, based on the movement of the earth, based on all these different factors. It's just this constant readjustment to correct course and to continue heading towards your destination.
You know, I always like that too, the idea of staying on course, the idea of, and you know, when you talk about, you know, you often hear like either an airplane analogy works. You know, you used to hear like the analogies of like navigation, like on a ship, right? Because you're steering the vessel, you're directing the course of the vessel. But in order to get where you're going, there's always going to be something that comes up where you can't just let it go. If you just let go of if you just let the plane do what it's doing, you're not going to make it where you need to go. You're going to crash and probably die, right? If you just let the ship go, God knows where you're going to end up.
Wind up on some deserted beach, a derelict.
So it's like you can't be a backseat passenger in your own life, right? Because you're not driving yourself. You're not, I always like these, there's the analogy of like, being the author of your life, like creating that story, it's always, but when you think of all of these, right, they're always active. You're in control, you're steering, you're writing it, you're doing something to make it happen. You're not just letting things happen to you. Because if you do that, if you just do what everyone else expects, if you do what the world expects, if you just sit back and let things happen, you will have problems, but you'll never have the life that you want, and you'll never be really engaged in it. I think that's part of our issue.
And engagement is part of a happy life. So, like, to have well-being, you need positive emotion, you need engagement, you need good relationships, meaning and accomplishment. Like, that's the positive psychology's definition of well-being, needing all those things. And so engagement in your life allows you to create accomplishments. It gives you meaning when you get those accomplishments. And then to do that stuff, you're going to need a positive emotion, then you're going to need relationships in order to do it. So that's kind of like all of it.
It is. And I like the engagement's important too, because like you said, it's like the focus comes from engagement, being involved in your life, right?
Yeah, saying yes to your life.
Yeah, saying yes to it. And recognizing too, I think this is the other issue with problems, is like when we have problems, and if we are focused on the problems that matter to us, and we are engaged in addressing them, one, there's a fulfillment there just in the process, because we see, it's like exercising, right? You see progress slowly as you go. You see your skill set building. You see your strength building. And so there's a positive feeling with, okay, I'm working towards something. I am actually making this happen. But when you're focused on other stuff and you're not saying no to other things, and you're letting all these other problems invade, you're going to miss days at the gym, right? You're going to miss times to exercise. You're going to get thrown off. You're going to shorten your workout, stuff like that. And eventually you'll end up not going, and you'll never reach that goal, right? And I think it's funny, but like I was thinking about this the other day. You hear a lot of people talk about habits and the importance of habits for a good life. You hear people say we're the collection of our habits, all that kind of stuff. But there is some truth to it, because it's like everything we do can be made into routine, can be made into habit. And the exercise example almost works really well for everything in life, right? Like if you want to do well in school, well, you develop the habits for studying, writing, attentiveness, whatever that you need to actually be a good learner, good student, and then ultimately, your own teacher. And you can kind of do that with anything. And when you really think about it, the more you kind of get distracted, the more you're going to get thrown off that routine, the less you're going to be committed to it and engaged. And I think that really is what it comes down to. But when we're engaged in it, our problems can be really positive, I think. But that's sort of like maybe the key and the difficult thing to get to.
Yeah. Well, there's like positive. Okay, so when there's a problem that you're involved in, you can try and change the problem. You can just leave, or you can accept the problem. And so I actually looked up the definition of accept, and accept is actually an active thing, because what it is, you're consenting to receive that problem.
Yeah,
So it's actually consenting, which is a positive action. You're saying, hey, this is happening, and I'm going to accept this. So as much as, oftentimes we might think of acceptance as kind of like a weak type of thing, or just like complacency, but it's not complacency. It's actually seeing that this is what it is and choosing this.
It's interesting because I think a lot of people do think accept is like a passive thing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, if I accept something, I'm not going to get angry at it, or I'm not going to react to it.
It's just like if Amazon brings you a package, you can always say no.
Yeah.
Like return to sender.
Yeah.
You don't have to accept a package, but it's allowing yourself to receive.
I like that, yeah, because you're always being engaged in your life. And I think this is probably our biggest problem when we talk about the inevitability of problems, right? Is that we're not engaged, we're not active all the time, right? We take a lot of breaks from being active in our lives. We let a lot of things happen. We get caught up in what's going on. We get distracted by bullshit on social media, the news, and we actually work ourselves up, but we're not really actively doing anything, Yeah. It's like, okay, I'll give you an example. Every time something happens major in the world, like say a natural disaster or something, and you see all these people jump online and say, thoughts and prayers, and like they want to be the first one to say that. And it's like, that's great sentiment, whatever. That's nice that you're saying that, but you're really not doing anything.
Nope.
That took you an eighth of a second, I mean, maybe less, to actually do that. You're not actually going out and helping anyone. You're not actually
it's the virtue signaling.
Yeah, right? It's virtue signaling. You're not doing anything. And I think that's what a lot of us end up doing, is we end up doing a lot of these meaningless things that aren't really active. We convince ourselves we're doing something. We pat ourselves on the back for doing something, but are we really doing anything?
Actually, the one thing that you're doing is reducing your happiness. So I saw this quote that there's evidence-based studies that anything done through a screen reduces your happiness. Anything not done through a screen increases your happiness.
I mean, that makes sense, right? Because, when it's through a screen, it's not active. There is a passivity to it. There's actually, there's a separation between you and what you're doing. I mean, even if you send something out, that way, you don't know who you're saying it to. You don't really have a direct goal. And
you have a direct goal.
Well, yeah, I guess you do. Yeah, you do.
To feel better about yourself.
To feel better about yourself.
Be pretentious, stick your nose up in the air,
Well, it's funny. That's the other side of this, right? Which is the other side of this whole activity, engagement, and problems, and addressing our problems in the right way, or facing them in the right way and embracing them, is, I think a lot of us really look for excuses. We look for ways to not only distract ourselves from problems, but make up reasons why we're not addressing them. To find reasons to explain why these things are happening and we're ignoring them, essentially, right? And again, that's really to be unengaged, right? Because we're finding ways to explain why we're not engaging with our lives, why we're not dealing with things.
Yeah, because it's easier not to.
Isn't it funny?
In the short term.
Yeah.
But this is the thing. It's easier in the short term. And I heard this the other day, and it's such a great thing. Because oftentimes these decisions will come up in my life where I kind of have to choose between two things, and they're pretty close, and so it's difficult to figure it out. And I heard this said that when you're trying to decide between two things and it's difficult to decide, always choose the one that's more difficult in the short term. Because what we'll do is we'll put off these things that are difficult in the short term for things that are more difficult in the long term, because it doesn't seem as clear, the difficult in the long term.
Okay.
But the thing is, if we choose the things that are difficult in the short term, if we do what is hard, in the long term, our life will be easy. Like going to the gym.
Yeah.
It's hard to wake up in the morning and go to the gym. But if I choose that short-term difficulty over laying in bed comfortably, I'm going to benefit in the long term. But if I choose a thing that's easier in the short term, it's going to be more difficult in the long term.
Well, that's funny, right? Because that's essentially what it means to be engaged and active in your life, right? Which is to make decisions not just for immediate pleasure and immediate comfort, but to make decisions for yourself long term. And really what that means is really taking care of yourself, strengthening yourself, developing skills, because all of that is useful long term. It'll make you better off long term, right? It'll make you healthier later in life. You'll be stronger by working out, right? You'll develop brain cells, all of that positive things. And but it takes doing it now and building it over time, and that's the hard part, because you don't see the immediate results, right? And we're so really hell-bent on immediacy and immediate comfort. I think that we do throw ourselves off and really put a wrench in our whole lives.
Yeah, one thing that I did this year that I've never done before that was very helpful in gaining some of that long-term perspective was actually creating a multi-year plan for my life. Like before that, I mean, up until I was through college, I kind of had a long-term goal, but then after college, it was just like, well, you just work until you retire, and then you retire until you die.
That is funny, isn't it? School it gives you sort of a pre-built goal, right?
Because you go each grade, you have a goal, and then you have getting out of elementary school, and then you have middle school, and then you have high school, and then you have college, and it's like all these 3 to 4 year goals, just, you're doing one after the other, and in those 3 to 4 year goals, you have the mini goals of each year, getting through that. And once you're out of school, it can be difficult to do that stuff. So actually sitting down and figuring out what my longer term goals were. And that was very helpful in giving me direction, because I can look at that every day and say, this is where I'm headed.
What's nice about that too is you can always obviously modify these things as necessary as you move forward in time. But what's nice about that is it actually does give you the direction we're talking about, right? It gives you a unity to your life. It gives you a sense of, what am I doing? I mean, that's the problem a lot of us struggle with, is what am I doing this for? Mm-hmm. What is the meaning of this?
Yeah, it makes the suffering worthwhile.
Well, yeah, because you've created a meaning, right? You've created a reason for your broader long-term actions, for the skills that you're developing. You have an idea of what you want down the road, and by doing that, you give yourself direction, and you are actively deciding. You're not letting things happen to you. You're not doing it because you fell into it or whatever, right? And by doing that, you're actually taking control of your life. And I really think this is the big part, right? It's taking control. It's being responsible. It's being active in your life as an active agent, right? It's agency. It's not taking that back seat. And I think this is the one thing a lot of us struggle with, because it is hard sometimes, because we don't know, or we feel like we don't know, or we're overwhelmed. We're not sure. And I think, if you feel that way about your life, one thing to do, I think, is to start to try and get clear about what you want. And it doesn't have to be, an entire plan of your life for the next 50 years. I don't think that's necessary, especially at first. Even having, a plan for the month, a plan for 6 months, a plan for a year, it gets you started. And as you do it, you'll find yourself having a clearer and clearer sense of really what you want,
Yeah, and it gives you things to work towards. And when you accomplish them, taking the time to enjoy it, be grateful for it, recognize the accomplishment. Because that was something that, I kind of had perfectionistic tendencies, I'll be honest.
Yeah, right.
But like, it got to a point where accomplishing the goal was the standard. And if I didn't do that, if I didn't accomplish it 100%, it was a failure. And that was like a completely faulty model again, because accomplishing a goal is like 100%. But, still doing any percent is better than doing nothing.
It is,
and
yeah.
And it's not completely binary all the time. There's shades of gray, and I think there's 50 shades of them.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And so just doing anything to kind of get you a little bit closer, a little bit better, a little bit more is so much better than doing nothing.
Yeah, and it's funny too, because it's we talked about education before, but school really, it's an interesting thing that we do to ourselves, because by setting up this system with all these mini goals and this plan, it does give individuals a purpose early in life, because they have this thing that they're working on. They feel good when they're doing well.
But notice how somebody else set up all those goals, all those plans, that whole schedule for them.
Right? Yeah, that's the problem. And that's the issue, is that, it seems like it's so easy because somebody else designed this whole thing and you're doing well, right?
Like imagine if when you're in kindergarten, everybody has these great dreams and goals. Like, I want to be the president, I want to be a pilot, I want to be whatever, fireman. If in kindergarten we could sit down with children, we could say, what's your dream? Okay, let's plan that together. And And instead of saying everybody needs to take 4 years of English, everybody needs to take 4 years of math, be like, okay, you want to be a fireman. What do you actually need to do? Well, physical education is going to be really important. Thermodynamics going to be very important.
Yeah,
so
it's
like
going to help.
Yeah, or if somebody wants to be a pilot, be like, okay, you're going to need to know math really well. You're going to need to understand vectors and different things like this. So actually sitting down and planning together, because that takes the passivity out of the school plan, but it actually helps the person recognize their dream.
Yeah, it's funny. I remember just even in high school, like we were fortunate enough that when we went to high school, we were still able to select our classes at that time. I think you remember, right?
Yeah, it was right before No Child Left Behind.
Yep, right before that. And when
AKA Every Child Left Behind.
Yeah, literally is what it means. It means mediocrity, right?
Yeah.
And when they started that, we were right at that point where we were able to still choose our courses in high school. And I was so happy about that because at least I knew I had to go to high school, but at least this way I had some agency. I had some choice in what I was doing. And it didn't even have to be a huge choice. Just a little bit of choice made me feel more like it was my decision to do this, right? But once they take that away, it's like, then you're just stuck in this thing. And I swear it's like, that's why I think people have such a hard time living a life that they want, because you get caught up in this whole system when you're young of other people planning it. And then, you look at life and you're like, well, what do I do? Well, all these other people are doing this, I'll do that. But you're not really living your life. You're not thinking it through, right? You're not reflecting on it. You're not being active, and you're not making your own decisions. Because, the fact is, when we are active and we make a decision to face a problem, it feels better when we overcome it, when we succeed, right? The success, even the intermediary success, feels better because it was our choice. There's nothing worse than being forced to do something. Because when you're forced to do it, it's like, okay, whatever. Even if I succeed, it's not my thing. I'm not an agent, right? I'm just doing this because somebody else wanted me to. I had to. And there's not that same connectedness in living your life, right? It's almost like you're living someone else's life, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we focused a lot on the inevitability of problems.
We did, yeah.
Let's take a look at the gift of problems.
They are a gift. It's funny because they're part of life. I mean, we're not getting away from them, right?
Mm-hmm.
But I think this is perspective again, that problems can be looked at as a gift. We can change the way we think about almost anything. And I think with problems, it's funny, but I noticed like the things I always was most happy about in my life were when I had the greatest difficulty in achieving it and overcoming it. I'll give you an example. When I was in undergrad, we had to do a thesis. It was an writing intensive school. And I chose one. I was in the philosophy program at the time. I chose one to write on Nietzsche's critique of Kant's moral theory. Very difficult. I ended up writing like a 70-page thesis. I got honors on it. But I'll tell you, it was difficult. I had to learn really difficult stuff at the time that I was not 100% familiar with. It was very difficult writing it. But I mean, I had so much fun doing it because it was something I chose. It was something I really wanted to do, and I wanted to figure it out. Like, the struggle was fun. And, it's like finding those kind of problems, understanding problems in that way. I think it's about agency and accepting them as part of the process. Like, I knew it was going to be hard. My professors were like, you sure you want to do this? Like, this is not easy. It's going to be difficult. And I was like, yeah, no, I want to do it. Like, forget it. And like, it was the best, because when you choose to do it and you know it'll be difficult and you realize you can, I mean, I think there is so much power in that. You feel your agency, I think. You see it almost.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think this is the challenge, right? Is how do we think about problems in a way that makes them, where we don't always look at the end. We don't always see problems as negative. I mean, because if you think about it, problems are also a way to betterment, right? They're a way to a better life. They're a way to a better self. They're a way to our own life, really. I mean, I think if we engage with them, we are accepting ourselves, our life, and we're taking ownership of it. I think there is that power there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. So seeing the opportunity that the problem gives you, I think, and you mentioned perspective, and I like to kind of look at ways of seeing things, perspective you could call it, like potential. So we all have problems, and these problems may seem difficult and may seem overwhelming even, but having a belief that empowers you, like, the universe will never hand me a problem that I cannot overcome.
I like that one.
Look at it. You've had problems throughout your whole entire life, and you've overcome every single one of them, and you're here. You know?
Yeah.
The like it's kind of the universe's way of just allowing you to realize your greatness by handing you these problems. Like, you notice that the more powerful somebody is, the bigger the problems they have. There was a great philosopher that once said, with great power comes great responsibility. I think that was from
Uncle, whatever the hell his name was. Was it Ben?
Man.
Uncle Ben? Yeah.
Something like that.
Yeah.
And so, but the thing is, the more powerful you become, the bigger a person you become, the bigger and the better your problems are. And it's not until you become, it's through those problems that you become a bigger and better person. But the handy mental model that you can have is that I'll never be given a problem that I can't overcome.
Which is true, right? Because there's always a path. There's always a path forward. There's always a way to address it. And it's finding that way. And I think, the thing is like, human beings, we are problem solvers. And I think when you really look at it, like, they're a part of life. They're inevitable. But they can also be an empowering, a fun part of life. They can also be, where we find joy in the process. Yeah. Because, if everything was easy, if everything was just handed to you, would that really be a good life? I mean, if you really think about it.
Think about the things that you've gotten in your life that were just given to you. You don't really value them.
No, right? When you have to work for something, when you have to put the effort in, when you have to make it happen, it becomes your own in a way that just handing me something doesn't, right? It becomes mine.
And not only that, but once you've achieved something, once you've overcome a problem, you no longer have to worry about that, because you can do it again. If that problem ever comes up again, guess what? I've done this before. I can do it again. Yeah. And so that's another gift that problems give you, is just the ability to have faith in yourself.
Yeah, it's funny, and a lot of that too is just understanding the time that it takes, understanding the effort that it takes on your part. I'll never forget when I was actually in undergrad, one of my advisors, who I really liked, he was a lot older than me at the time. He was, I think, he had to be in his late 60s.
I'm going to guess he's still that much older than you.
Yes,
now.
He is. He always has been. It's weird, I know. It's bizarre. That was an insane way to say that. But whatever. Anyway, so, he was probably he had to have been in his late 60s. So, but, I was frustrated at the one point because I was, struggling with learning something. And he was like, and I was like, I'll never know it as well as you do. And he was like, that's ridiculous. He's like, I've had this many decades more of time spent with this material, reading. He's like, basically my library of information that I can pull from is so much greater than yours. He's like, that you'll have no problem with this. When you think about it in those terms, right? That the more problems I encounter, the more I solve, the more skills I develop, the more experiences I have, that's just more for me to draw on for every new problem, every new encounter. And it's essentially like, it's exactly an increase in power, right? It's an increase in ability all the time. And when you think of it that way, I think it does help with the time and with the effort involved, because if you put in the effort, you get the return. If you don't put in the effort, you get nothing.
Yeah, I think we fail to see that so often, the benefit of time.
Yeah, we do.
There's this saying that I repeat to myself, that patiently, persistently, you are bound to succeed. Because if you just do something persistently over and over again, be patient, you're going to succeed. On a long enough timeline, you can learn anything. And just give it time. Like, eventually, it'll change.
Well, yeah, that's what we struggle with, right? We want the immediate result. Because, that's the other problem, right? We're so focused on results equaling happiness that we want the immediate result because we think we'll be happy. And we talked about this before, but you're missing out on living life. You're missing out on actually doing the things that make the result worthwhile, which is the agency and the development. And, we see a lot of people talk about this, the popularity of Stoicism was really, a lot of it, I think, was motivated by the fact that they look at problems in that way as positive, right? As a way to develop. And I think, a lot of philosophers, a lot of ethicists all talk about this. This is not new knowledge, right? It's stuff human beings have struggled with, forever. I think, one of the things it's funny, I was saying this to my dad, one of the things I've always loved about philosophy is you can look at these works from thousands of years ago and you realize that human beings have had the same goddamn problems forever. No matter what happens, no matter how society changes, we have the same individual problems. Finding meaning in life, dealing with life, dealing with issues, struggles, figuring out who we are, how to live. And, they all recognize, too, that, it takes time and it takes effort, but there is value in that, right? That because living our lives, it has to be ours. We have to be agents. And I think when you think about problems in this way and you own them as part of your development, as part of who you are, as defining, that's where really the value comes in, right? You start to see them differently. You start to see those struggles as not something bad that should be avoided, but something good that should be embraced, because with it, you move forward, you step up, you ascend, right?
Yeah, like recognizing when you have a problem, instead of just seeing the problem, recognizing that your life is getting better.
Yeah, right? And recognizing that it's not just the end goal that matters, but it's everything else in between is getting there. It's like the Zen Buddhists say, right? If you sit down and meditate with the goal of nirvana, you're not meditating in the right way, right? Because you've already failed. You've already effectively, you've gone in with the wrong mentality.
Yeah, I've heard that one where a student goes to a Zen master and he says, if I sit down and meditate, how long will it take me to reach enlightenment? And the master says 10 years. And so the student says, well, what if I try really hard and I put in a lot of effort? And the master says 20 years. And he's like, but what if I just commit myself fully and do it with everything I've got? And the master says 30 years.
It just keeps getting worse. You're just got the wrong idea about it, right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing too with problems. It's like, it's funny, but if you ever notice, when you're doing something you really love, when you're really engaged in something, you don't even really notice the problems. You see them as necessary, as part of it, as fun. Like I said, when I was working on my thesis, it was hard, but I never thought of it as a problem. I thought of it as something I need to overcome. I thought of it as something I could do. I knew I could do it. I thought of it as like something to prove myself. I never really thought of it as a negative way. Not once did I think of it negatively. And I think that's the defining thing. That's the difference. When we think about problems in the right way and we focus on the right problems, our life is better because we are really engaged and they're not problems in that negative sense anymore. They become something positive.
A gift.
A gift.
You could
say. Literally a gift.
An inevitable gift.
An inevitable gift. They're there for the taking.
Well, Danny, I feel like that's a great spot to leave
it.
Yeah.
So with the title.
Yeah, right? So guys, thank you so much for listening to the episode today. Make sure to subscribe and also share the episode with friends, family, loved ones, hated ones, whoever.
Yeah, it doesn't matter to us.
Yeah, and we'll catch you back next week for another full-length episode, but also make sure to check out midweek for a quick fix, a short little 10-minute episode for you guys.
Yeah, our new series. It's fun.
Yeah. So we'll see you next time. Have a good one.
All right, later.